Well, hey there, my friends, and how's it going on this Thursday afternoon? I wanted to talk for a moment, just a brief moment, about the hunga hapai volcano in Tonga. Wow, I got it right that time. The hunga hapai volcano in Tonga, or maybe it's hapai. I know it's a Polynesian term, kind of like Hawaii isn't Hawaii. Anyhow, this video I would like to talk a little bit about the volcanic eruption that happened a few days back. I've been thinking about this a bit, and there's other things that I could talk about. I actually uploaded a video earlier, which was a comparison between what's going on in Australia as far compared to the UK, right? As far as the UK today just basically said tomorrow there's no more lockdowns, there's no more green pass, there's no more COVID passports, there's no more masks required in schools or businesses or anywhere. Basically, the UK has decided to go back to complete normal. In the world stage of things, that seems like a big deal because everyone's been focused on COVID and lockdowns. When the volcano erupted the other day, it reminded a few people at least that the Earth still has a few surprises up her sleeves. What I mean is that in the past several decades, there's been a lot more controversy and a lot more frustration, it seems, over some of the most trivial things that we've kind of become a little comfortable in our Western, especially our Western world, thinking that, little problems are big problems. This is how all of us have been convinced that the other side is somehow the enemy, and there's always somebody to point the finger at. In the past, even when major natural disasters would happen, people would blame it on someone else. The devil, witches, you name it. But it was never just the way things are. And I've always, from the time I was at least at, probably 16, 17, I've hung on to this idea that sometime in my lifetime there's going to be a major disaster that's going to either just break us or make us. In other words, bring people together. But this disaster could come at any time. Now, what happened with the hunga hapai volcano in Tonga was that when it erupted 5 days ago, it was the biggest eruption in 30 years. And because it was in the ocean, it basically, the way that the winds rotate in that area and the areas of pressure, it basically was an updraft that carried that shit like 60,000 feet up into the atmosphere. And this, I think it was even further than that, but this allows the aerosols to spread out within the stratosphere. Once that happens, and this happens every time a volcano erupts, we have about a 1 to 2 degree, at least is what they're predicting on this, Celsius reduction in temperature over the next year, 2, 3, 10, whatever it might be. We can't predict that yet. And we'd like to think we can predict it. We'd like to think we can predict a lot of things. That volcano started erupting in late December. Then it went quiet for a while, and they declared it dormant. 4 days later is when that eruption came. It had no forewarning, no predictions. There was absolutely no sign that this was going to happen. And then boom. That shock wave is an amazing satellite photograph. But the most amazing fact is people heard it in Alaska. People heard it up to 6,000 miles away, the shock wave. It was huge. And that volcano, by comparison to some in the past, is just puny. And what I started thinking about was this reduction in temperature for a few years. They said that that volcano released the equivalent of like 2 years worth of, or maybe somebody declared it set us back up to a decade in emissions because it's going to, here's the thing, when it's close to the Earth, it creates a greenhouse effect. When these particles like sulfur dioxide and others are shot up into the stratosphere, they can remain for years. Once they're aloft and they're up there, they actually block the sun, which can give us kind of a nuclear winter, or we call it a nuclear, it would be a volcanic winter, which we've had before. I think it was 1512, I can't recall. There was a little ice age, there was a 3-year winter. Point being that if a larger volcanic eruption occurred today, it could set us back decades, not just in weather. It could set us back decades in technology, in growing crops. Can you imagine not being able to grow adequate crops for just 2 years in this world that we have today? This world where everyone is affected by commerce and everyone else's business is everyone else's business. So I don't want to go off too much on this. I just wanted to say that the point of this video is that with all the bullshit going on in the world with COVID, with politics, with military coups, and all the shit that goes on in these our human lives, we haven't faced anything like a cataclysm that could yet that would completely change the way that we do business. All of that would go by the wayside. And there are only 3 that I can think of that I actually consider to be adequate threats to humanity as an entire species. I live on the West Coast. We know that we could have a 9 point whatever earthquake. It would be devastating to the West Coast. It would just annihilate our ports all the way up to Seattle, but that wouldn't affect the whole world. The world could go on. So what I'm talking about is, what 3 cataclysms could I mean that may affect us in our lifetimes? And number 1, and the most prominent, and the one I'm most aware of, would be a CME, or coronal mass ejection. Solar flare, you might call it. We will know it's coming. We'll know the type of storm because once it hits those satellites, they get affected by that solar wind, and if it takes a satellite out, we know we're in trouble. But we have G-class magnetic storms all the time. We could have X-class. We are moving into a solar maximum. There's a lot more sunspot activity. And if something happened, a lot of people don't follow the sun very much, but it's not doesn't have a huge following. But back in 2012, a solar flare erupted from the far side of the sun. And this was what they call the planet killer. If that had been Earth directed when that erupted, it would have taken down all the grids. And because it wasn't, we got lucky. Of course, we always get lucky. But eventually you don't. And back in 1859, we had the Carrington event, which was a major solar event where they saw aurora borealis all the way down to the equator. Down in the Caribbean, people saw northern lights, right? They call them northern lights because, of course, they're usually up north where the magnetosphere, collects that energy. I'm not going to get into the details. A big enough flare could actually cause our transmission lines to overload and blow out the major transformers that convert electricity and allow us to basically function as a nation. Some of these take years to build, and there's none in stock. Like, it is one of the major threats we have is the grid getting fried. Because if you woke up tomorrow morning and you went to turn on your lights and they didn't work, then you went to get your phone and figured, well, I'll just see what's going on, and your phone didn't work. What the hell would you do? If you walked out in the middle of the night with no power and you looked up in the sky and you live in, say, California and you see northern lights or an aurora, first thing I would do is get down to the grocery store quickly and get as much food as you can and stock up on things, because something like that could happen. From solar flare, there's 2 other things that I consider. One is a meteor impact, and that, of course, is totally unpredictable. We don't know where it would hit, how much damage it could cause. I won't even go into the details on that one. As far as a volcanic eruption, they happen with regularity, and if a larger eruption like this happened, it really could block out the sun for a couple of years. And I'm only saying this not to cause fear or say, oh my God, we're all doomed, because we may very well live our lives without ever facing any of these things. But I feel almost like we have to face something like this. Otherwise, we're going to destroy ourselves first. If we cannot unite against a common threat, I won't say enemy, then we will continue to make enemies out of one another and assume that your neighbor is the threat. Over the past few years, I have seen people completely go off the deep end. And it's not just COVID, it's not just technology. There's something else going on, I can't put my finger on it. But humanity is kind of losing its shit. And at the same time, is a segment of society that really understands that these things can be mended, that we can improve in the future, that no matter what happens to society, as you define it, individuals can always find a way to carry on. And the most important thing is that we stick together. Uniting against a common enemy can feel really good. But when it's a natural disaster, and I've said this before, after a tornado takes your town out or a hurricane floods out your city, you don't exactly ask which neighbors you're helping out when you're pulling them out of their house or saving them off their rooftops. You're not asking, hey, are you a liberal or are you a conservative? Because those things don't matter anymore. There's a basic shared humanity that we all have. And I feel like if we really believe that there's a connection between people, I wouldn't say I believe 100% in what others may think of as the Gaian hypothesis, but I do believe the Earth is conscious. And the Earth finds its way to balance things out. And therefore, humans, we're not the be-all, end-all. Treating our planet with respect and treating each other with respect is paramount. And I have strong feelings about that, but I also can't really define them in words. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about destruction, the potential for destruction, and the ability for all of us to realize ahead of time that we don't have to fight about petty things or argue about what's going on in the world. But it sure is easy to do when there's nothing else going on. Soon enough, my friends, something will happen. I guess if you live in Tonga, something already happened, right? If you live in an area where a disaster has happened, that's when you change your perspective. But for the Western world, we've become way too passive. I don't know what the solution is, but just thoughts. Peace out. Talk to you next time.